Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, today we're tackling a big one, maybe the big one, Shakespeare's Hamlet.
It really is, isn't it? And it's one of those works where just reading it isn't quite enough. You really need the context to unpack it.
Absolutely. We're not just reading a play. We're sort of navigating this huge landscape of history, language, different texts even.
Yeah, and the core mystery, everyone knows, why does Hamlet wait? He seems to have every reason to act, but he delays. That's the big puzzle.
That's the mission for today. We've gone through a pretty hefty stack of academic sources stuff on Shakespeare's life, the Elizabethan stage, the textual issues, all that critical history.
Right, and the goal is to pull out those key insights, the things that really change how you see the play, how you understand the Prince of Denmark.
We're going to look at how, believe it or not, pronunciation changes actually broke some of Shakespeare's jokes.
Completely ruin them. And also how tiny grammatical things, like using thou instead of you, were actually like a really sharp social tool.
And even how the physical theater, the famous wooden O, shaped the play itself, maybe even Hamlet's psychology. Okay, let's dive in. Where do we start? The man himself.
Yeah, let's start with Shakespeare. We often think of him as this sort of mythical figure, but the sources show us someone quite grounded, actually. Came from a pretty prominent family, at least initially.
Right, his father, John Shakespeare. He wasn't just some anonymous guy in Stratford. He was actually the High Bailiff in 1568. That's basically the mayor, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Top job in town. So William grew up with a sense of, status, position, but then things seem to have gone a bit sour for the family financially.
Yeah, the sources mention litigation after 1577, his father having to mortgage his wife's property. It suggests Shakespeare knew both sides of the coin, prosperity and, well, financial pressure.
Exactly. And maybe that fuels some ambition, because the very first mention we have of him as a playwright is actually an attack, a really nasty one.
The upstart crow comment from Robert Greene in 1592.
That's the one. Greene, this university-educated writer, is furious at this actor, this Shakespeare, who's suddenly writing plays and becoming popular. Beautified with our feathers, he says.
It's amazing historical gossip, isn't it? But it tells us something crucial.
Definitely. It tells us that by 1592, Shakespeare wasn't just starting out. He was successful enough, established enough, to make these established guys jealous. He must have been acting and writing for, at least a few years before that.
So not exactly an overnight success, but clearly a rising star causing a stir. Okay, from the man to his tools, his language. It's staggering when you look at it.
Oh, absolutely. The sources talk about a vocabulary maybe near 30,000 words. And he wasn't just using existing words, he was inventing them, or at least giving us the first recorded use of words we still use all the time.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, words like lackluster, fancy-free, sea change,
Yeah.
even dwindle. They pop up first in Shakespeare.
Wow. But beyond just the sheer number of words, there's the sound of them, right? That's where things get tricky for us reading today.
That's where the fun and the frustration comes in. Pronunciation changes mean some of his puns, some really clever wordplay, just fall flat now. They don't work anymore.
Okay, you have to give us the classic example, the one everyone mentioned.
It's got to be the reasons versus raisins pun in Verse Henry IV.
Huh.
Falstaff gets asked for his reasons.
Right.
And he fires back, "If reasons were as plentiful as blackberries, I would give no man a reason upon compulsion."
Which sounds completely bizarre today. Like, why compare reasons and blackberries?
Because reasons back then sounded almost exactly like raisins.
Yeah.
The whole joke is comparing two types of dried fruit. It's a completely absurd food-based deflection. Without knowing the old pronunciation, the joke is just gone.
That's brilliant. And
Yeah.
completely lost otherwise? Is there a darker example of that?
There is, yeah.
Yeah.
In To Henry IV, the soldier says, "We owe God a death." Simple enough line.
Seems straightforward, acknowledging mortality.
But in Elizabethan times, death was often pronounced very much like debt, D-E-B-T.
So we owe God a debt.
Exactly. It frames mortality, this huge existential thing, in everyday, almost commercial terms. It's incredibly grounding. And again, totally dependent on knowing how they spoke. You need this kind of deep dive to catch it.
It really brings the language alive in a different way. And it wasn't just pronunciation. The grammar was different too, right? More flexible.
Much more flexible. Things that would make an English teacher cringe today were perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Like double comparatives,
Yeah.
The most unkindest cut of all.
Or double negatives.
Yep. Will not budge for no man's pleasure. Perfectly normal. And they hadn't quite pinned down the word it's for a neutral possessive yet.
So they'd use his instead.
Often, yeah. Like Portia's line in Merchant of Venice, how far that little candle throws his beams. We'd absolutely say its beams today.
Okay, those are fascinating quirks. But the linguistic thing that seems absolutely vital for Hamlet, according to the sources, is the pronoun game, thou versus you.
Oh, this is huge. It's not just grammar, it's social warfare almost. You is the default polite, formal, respectful way to address someone.
And
Thou and its forms thy and thee were much more loaded. You'd use it for talking down to someone, a servant, a child, even an animal, or for intimacy with family, lovers. But crucially, you could also use it to show contempt, to insult someone.
so switching between them is a massive signal about the relationship.
A massive signal. You mentioned the Othello example, Brabantio hearing someone outside calling out using the polite you. Then he realizes it's Rodrigo, this guy he despises.
And he switches immediately to the insulting thee.
Instantly. It's like
Yeah.
flicking a switch. And in Hamlet, this becomes incredibly important with the ghost.
How so?
When Hamlet first sees the ghost in Act 1, Scene 5, he addresses it using thou, which makes sense. It's intimate maybe because it looks like his father, but it's also how you might address a spirit, something not quite human, potentially dangerous.
Oh, okay, that fits. But then later,
Later, in Act 3, Scene 4, when the ghost appears again, this time in Gertrude's private room, Hamlet switches. He uses the formal, respectful you.
and the thinking is, what does that switch signify?
The interpretation is that by this point, Hamlet has staged the play within a play, the mousetrap. He's seen Claudius's guilt. He's now convinced this apparition is his father's true spirit, deserving of respect, not some demon trying to trick him.
So the pronoun change marks a moment of certainty for Hamlet. Wow.
Exactly. It's a psychological turning point revealed through grammar. And this kind of linguistic precision was almost forced on Shakespeare, wasn't it? Because the physical stage itself offered so little help visually.
That's a perfect transition. Let's talk about that stage, the Elizabethan theater. It's a world away from what we expect now.
Totally different. Shakespeare himself calls it a wooden O in Henry V. These public playhouses were typically round, or maybe polygonal, and the key thing, open to the sky.
Meaning the audience in the pit, the groundlings, were literally standing out in the open for a penny.
Yep, rain or shine. And because it was open air, no roof, that meant.
No artificial lights. All performances had to happen during the daytime.
Exactly. And forget about elaborate sets. Scenery was incredibly minimal. Maybe a throne, a table, that's it.
Yeah. So Shakespeare had to paint the scene with words.
He had to. That's why you get such vivid descriptive language. Lines like, argosies with portly sail. He's telling you you're at a harbor because there's nothing on stage to show you.
And the simple stage design created practical problems too, didn't it? Like, what do you do with dead bodies? There's no curtain to close.
Right. The stage jutted out into the audience. If someone died in the play, you couldn't just leave the actor lying there for the rest of the show. The body had to be removed.
Which explains that rather blunt line from Hamlet after he kills Polonius.
I'll lug the guts into the neighbor room. It sounds crude, but it's stage management. It's practical problem solving dictated by the architecture. They also had trap doors in the stage floor.
Called Hell, for ghosts and sound effects.
Yep. And usually an upper level, the above,
Yeah.
used for castle walls or balconies. Basic, but functional.
But one of the biggest constraints, the one that really limited how plays like Hamlet were even structured, was the casting, specifically for female roles.
Ah, the boy actors. This is crucial. All female parts were played by boys, usually young teenagers, maybe between, say, 8 and 13.
Sometimes called a transvestite theater, though that term's a bit anachronistic.
Right. And the point is, theater companies just didn't have that many boys trained and skilled enough for these demanding roles.
Which directly limited the number of women characters Shakespeare could write into any given play.
Absolutely. Think about Hamlet. It's this huge, sprawling play, tons of characters.
Right.
How many named female roles are there?
Just two, Ophelia and Gertrude.
Exactly. Out of like 24 named roles. It's a direct result of the labor available, the trained boy actors.
So the stage itself, the actors available, they shape the very substance of the play. But there's an even bigger instability lurking behind Hamlet, isn't there? The text itself.
Oh, yeah. This is a huge headache for scholars, and something most people reading it today don't realize. We don't actually have one definitive Hamlet.
We have 3 early printed versions that are all different.
Right. There's the first quarto, Q1, which is generally considered a sort of garbled, maybe memorized version. Then the second quarto, Q2, which is the longest version we have. And then the version printed in the first folio, F, which is a bit shorter than Q2.
So Q1 is bad, Q2 is long, F is maybe the acting version?
That's the general idea.
Yeah.
Q2 is nearly 4,000 lines long. That's a very long play for the Elizabethan stage, which probably aimed for closer to 2 or 3 hours.
So the version they likely performed closer to the folio text must have cut things.
Almost certainly. Cuts were made for length, for pacing, what they called theatrical expediency, and the most famous thing potentially cut from the stage version.
Hamlet's big soliloquy in Act 4, How All Occasions Do Inform Against Me, where he really beats himself up about delaying.
Exactly. That whole speech, which is central to the delay problem, is missing from the folio text. It suggests that maybe even back then, for performance, they streamlined that internal debate.
Which is fascinating because that delay, that inaction, is pretty much Shakespeare's invention, isn't it? The original story it's based on doesn't have that problem.
Not at all. In the old Danish legend, the source story by Saxo Grammaticus, the hero Amlev pretends to be mad, sure, but he acts pretty decisively when the time comes. There's no hand-wringing.
So Shakespeare creates the problem. Hamlet himself flags it constantly. Lines like, I do not know, why yet I live to say, this thing's to do. He knows he should act, he has the means, but he doesn't. And that kicks off centuries of debate.
Centuries. Why the delay? What's stopping him?
Okay, let's walk through the major theories the sources cover. The big one, especially in the 19th century, was the meditative genius idea, Coleridge, Bradley.
Right. This view sees Hamlet as fundamentally intellectual, a man of thought, not action. Coleridge called him a man living in meditation, called upon to act. His very nature defeats the task. He's always resolving to do, yet doing nothing but resolve.
It paints him as this sensitive, philosophical soul, maybe too refined for the brutal act of revenge, which resonated a lot with the Romantics.
It did. But the play itself kind of pushes back against that, doesn't it?
Yeah, the sources point out he's not just a thinker. Ophelia herself calls him the courtier, scholar, soldier. He does act impulsively at times.
Definitely. Stabbing Polonius through the curtain, that's not meditative.
Yeah.
Boarding a pirate ship, switching the letters to have Rosencrantz and Guildenstern killed. These are rash, decisive actions.
So that too sensitive to act theory feels a bit incomplete, which leads us to the 20th century and Freud.
Yes. The Oedipus complex arrives in Elsinore. This interpretation, really pushed by Ernest Jones, completely reframed the delay.
How does that work exactly, the Oedipal reading?
Basically, the theory is that Hamlet has a repressed, unconscious desire to kill his own father and possess his mother. It's buried deep down.
Okay.
So when Claudius actually does kill Hamlet's father and marry his mother, Claudius has acted out Hamlet's own forbidden wish.
Right, so Hamlet can't kill Claudius because...
Because Claudius is like a dark mirror of Hamlet's own hidden self. To kill Claudius would be like killing a part of himself, confronting his own taboo desires. He's paralyzed by this internal unconscious conflict.
And this interpretation became hugely influential, didn't it? Especially in performance.
Massively. Laurence Olivier's 1948 film is drenched in it. For decades, that psychological reading was almost the default way to understand Hamlet's inaction. It made him feel modern, relatable in a new psychological way.
It shifted the focus from external obstacles to internal turmoil. But there's another line of thought, right? That maybe the delay is about morality, a religious objection to revenge.
People have certainly argued that. But again, the text doesn't really support it that strongly. Hamlet never says revenge is wrong. He worries about whether the ghost is honest, whether Claudius is truly guilty, whether the time is right.
Not whether the act itself is sinful.
Not explicitly, no. In fact, later in the play, Act 5, Scene 2, he sounds pretty convinced that killing Claudius is the right thing to do. He calls it perfect conscience and says letting Claudius continue would be to be damned.
So if he's not morally opposed, and the Oedipal thing is one interpretation, why did so many people latch onto the moral explanation? What allows that reading?
I think it's the sheer fact that he pauses. He thinks so much, he questions so much, that it leaves a space. And interpreters can fill that space with their own ideas about morality or duty or what a noble prince should feel. They maybe want him to have a higher motive than just waiting for proof.
So if it's not purely thought, not purely Oedipal, not purely morality, how does he finally break through? Something changes after his sea voyage.
Absolutely. He comes back different. Quieter, calmer almost. Resigned. But in a strong way. He seems to have let go of the need to control everything, to engineer the perfect revenge.
He moves towards acceptance. Providence.
Exactly. That's when we get those incredibly famous lines about destiny. There is special providence in the fall of a sparrow. He realizes some things are out of his hands, and his final stance becomes, the readiness is all. Be prepared. Accept what comes.
And the actual revenge, when it finally happens, isn't part of some grand strategy Hamlet cooks up?
No, it's almost accidental, or rather, it comes about because of Claudius's own plotting. Claudius sets up the poisoned sword, the poisoned cup.
And it backfires spectacularly.
Completely. Laertes wounds Hamlet. They somehow exchange swords. Hamlet wounds Laertes. The queen drinks the poison meant for Hamlet. Laertes confesses the plot before dying. And then finally, Hamlet forces Claudius to drink the poison and stabs him with the poison foil.
It's Claudius's own treachery that provides the means in the moment.
Precisely. As Horatio says, it's about purposes mistook fallen on the inventors' heads. Justice arrives, but through a kind of terrible poetic irony, not Hamlet's direct plan.
So when we put all this together, the language puzzles, the stage limits, the different texts, the centuries of trying to figure out his delay, it really shifts the perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. You stop seeing Hamlet as just a simple revenge story that somehow goes wrong. It becomes this incredibly deep exploration of what it means to act, to think, to be moral in a world full of corruption and uncertainty.
The complexity isn't a flaw, it's the whole point. He's wrestling with these impossible questions under impossible circumstances.
Exactly. He's trying to find the right path, and maybe the delay is part of that process.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to take away. Think about traditional revenge plays, the Senecan model. Often, the revenger has to become corrupted, almost villainous, to get the job done.
Like Laertes in this play, right? He wants quick revenge, gets manipulated by Claudius, agrees to use a poisoned, unbaited sword in a supposedly friendly duel. He compromises himself.
Right. So here's the question. Did Hamlet's delay, his reflection, his struggle with conscience and certainty, actually prevent him from becoming purely villainous? Did his thoughtfulness, even if it paralyzed him at times, ultimately allow him to achieve revenge without totally losing his moral compass, making him a different, maybe even more successful kind of tragic hero?
Something to ponder next time you grapple with the Prince of Denmark.